Akkermans here, Supply Network Dynamics Chapter 3, Part 6, cognitive filters, and then some real-world examples. To show you some of the examples that occur in the real world, where you can see that actually people have problems dealing with stocks and flows and delays. Here are some graphs that are mostly not from the cases that we look into. None of them are actually of those 9 cases, but still are relevant examples. Here's an example from the semiconductor industry that I did together with Paulo Gonçalves, back then of MIT. Nowadays, Paulo teaches in Lugano. And here we looked at a case setting where the IC manufacturer was actually hit on the head by a very demanding Asian customer who sent their top management on a number of occasions to order something, and they then didn't get what they wanted. And the graph that we made here was not in their IT systems, because in their IT system the whole order book is in there, so they only saw the accumulations. Usually it's the other way around, but in an order book where you have all the old and new orders, you see all the accumulations. In this case, we mapped for them, Paulo did basically most of the work, the rates. Here you see the blue lines are the actual orders that they placed. And here you see those orders, 4 million at a time, 2.5 million, 3 million. Those are gigantic. But in the meantime, they don't order a lot. And typically there was around the time that they would send their management around. Over to complain why didn't they get their shipments. But actually, if you look at the shipping rate, that's pretty much nicely in line with what they actually needed. So this company wasn't doing so bad at all, only the customer had a very lumpy demand pattern. That's one example where people actually looked at the accumulations and therefore didn't want to see that the rates weren't all that bad. Here's another example from shipbuilding. This shipbuilding company had a peak in 2007 in their order intake. There was a worldwide peak in order intake, and the end of the peak was more towards 2008 in shipments. So it takes normally a year and a half to build ships. Depends on how big or complex they were. In this case, apparently in a year and a half or so. But the main point is here that all of 2008 they were extremely busy. But what they could notice that in 2008 actually the market was already shrinking. They ordered a lot here, but in 2007 a lot less. 2009 would be even worse. But this peak in mid-2007 was actually supplied over the year in 2008. And if you then take the inflow and subtract from that the outflow, you get a peak in the order book up here. But actually you should worry in 2008 about future demand rather than about the busyness in the order book. Now what they did is they actually started producing ships to stock, so without an actually paying customer at the start of production, precisely in 2008, when they already were very busy, so not good timing, but also at the time when the actual market was already shrinking. Had they done that in 2006, it would have been brilliant. In 2008, it's just the wrong action at the wrong time. So, not a good plan after all. Thanks to Dirk de Grote for giving me these numbers. Here's an example from telecom. And the story here is that this was a certain product in the professional market which required also outside contractors to do quite some work. So the first initial stage is the specification of the order, the contracting. That had to be done by the company, the telecom company, but then actually stuff had to be, you had to dig in stuff, etc. For cables, and there was somebody, an outside party, and that took a whole lot longer. In the meantime, the install rate was here very stable, although it started increasing here, but by this time the actual install had to be done again by the technicians from the telecom company, but the contracting had to be done by outside parties. Now they got a huge inflow here, and actually what those contractors did quite nicely is they spread out that work over time. But because they spread it out, the telco company didn't get back its finished orders, so it started shrinking its technician base that could install. And by the time that those contracting orders came back, they no longer had the technicians to do the install rate again. So here they lost track of the accumulation of orders that were in the pipeline. When the senior manager in charge of this business saw this graph somewhere around here, he said, well, if only I had seen this graph, I would have acted a year earlier, I would have acted very differently. But yeah, nobody makes those graphs because the time horizon is too long, and distinguishing accumulations rates from each other was apparently not something that was done in this company, but more about that later. And of course, in this time, they had huge problems with customers because they didn't have the technicians to do a timely field install. Okay, enough examples of how difficult it is to have bathtub dynamics in prime.